Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Your Worship, councillors, our other committee members, good morning. Welcome to our Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting today, the 13th of April. And of course, to those watching from afar, we are streaming live. No mai haramai, welcome to you also. Do we have any? Oh, we do have some apologies this morning. We have Mr. Phil Thomas, who has given us apology, and the apology this morning has come in from Councillor Kent. May I have a mover and a seconder, please, that we receive these apologies? Thank you, Councillor Bentley. Thank you, Councillor Gould. So those that have been, happy to put it to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye. Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest, please? Carl? Urgent items on the agenda? Yes, Councillor Sturt. Oh.
Madam Chair, in front of those members, other than those who would already have a copy of being a member of this organisation, I've got a copy of a press release dated the 11th of April from the RDRRs, in which they state in the last paragraph, however, since Council shows no sign of living within its means and using its annual plan to end gross overcapacity and screwflation, RDRR reluctantly calls on the government to install statutory management. Now, Madam Chair, the rest of it I can live with, but when they're going to approach government to do that, I just wondered whether it was appropriate that our CEO seek some guidance in terms of the allegations that they make in this press statement, which isn't a submission to our annual plan, it's a public statement. I was asked by the media to comment on this yesterday and I declined. I thought it was so important that they're now engaging the government on a wild goose chase to install a statutory manager when we've got a double A minus rating. We've got Audit New Zealand telling us we're doing a fantastic job. It not only impugns Her Worship the Mayor and the council, the elected council, it also impugns the integrity of our staff.
So in that case, may I ask then why, because we know the good news, why would we want to even comment?
Well, Madam Chair, I think it needs to come to the attention of the public of Rotorua in terms that they're now going to call on the government, as in the last paragraph, to install statutory management.
Yes, I'll ask the Mayor to respond to that.
I too was asked to comment and I said it's merely a submission and I don't comment on any submissions at this stage.
I think it's actually a press release, in fact.
Not a submission.
But it's included
Thank
in
you.
the submission.
Councillor Bentley, did you want to have a word? Otherwise we're going to move on.
I need to try and clarify something for Councillor Sturt's benefit. Is that I believe he's accusing me of being a member of that association at the moment, and it's that's not true. So I'd ask you to retract that.
I'll withdraw and apologise, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
I thought you were a headline member of the group.
Thank you. Ms Morrison?
Madam Chair, I just wonder if, taking your lead, if it's appropriate if we could have an update on, in light of the weather impacts.
Certainly.
And particularly around the wastewater treatment plant. We had a really good update from Stavros last time, and just to for us to be able to be
yes, I think we will, and we'll perhaps take that a bit later in our agenda. Thank you. Yes, they may unfold, and it looks as if we are in for some heavy weather in the next few days as well. Thank you.
Madam Chair,
yes.
Point of order. Is Chief Executive Officer going to respond? Because I've raised it, I'm going to table it. I think it does need a response that we need to look into this matter, because if they're serious about engaging the Minister of Local Government in asking them to provide a statutory manager, we need to be in a position to respond strongly to the Minister and have the facts and evidence to say that that is not required.
I'll let our Chief Executive respond.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Look, my take on this is that anyone, and in fact, can ask the Minister to impose statutory management into any entity. There's no prevention for people to make that sort of a comment. The test, of course, that the Minister will immediately look to is actually statutory management actually needed or necessary in the situation. My immediate reaction to that would be, and I think Councillor Sturt, you have already made the observation, that an organisation that has got a significantly positive credit rating, which has only just been actually released. At the same time, an organisation that has actually got a history over the last 3 years of reducing debt. Our investment into the likes of renewals are significant and at an appropriate level, and all of this has also been audited by the Auditor General's Office, and we certainly have got clean audits for every year. So it is actually extremely difficult to see on what grounds that this request could possibly be made, given the financial performance and position that this organisation is actually in today.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Tapsell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I may raise an item about the timeframes for agendas.
Oh, thank you, yes.
So, we only received these agendas 2 days ago, and I really don't believe that's satisfactory time to be able to read through the content. So while I've been able to read through it, it certainly doesn't give us enough time to talk to our constituents, and certainly doesn't give the board members enough time, Te Tātou community, Te Tātou, the Lakes and the Rural Board members enough time to go back to their areas and discuss issues, which in here are some significant ones. So I would really like us to be getting at least a week or at least 5 days in advance, and I know that Mr. Berryman Camp actually has an issue on this as well.
Thank you. Yes, it's something that I am going to pick up and take up with our Chief Executive. Thank you. Yes. Yes.
We've also made a decision following a request from the chair of the Lakes Community Board on behalf of the community boards and a bit of advocacy from Peter Bentley that the board members should be supplied with a tablet which will help you feel that you are absolutely on the same page as us as councillors and Te Tātou Board. So that decision is an executive decision that we have made. That will help with the paper trail that community board members are having to rely upon.
Thank you, but I would like to say thank you for raising that, Councillor Tapsell, because this week's board papers I was particularly unhappy with because I've had a 2-day conference, an all-day training yesterday, and it's just been trying to get through everything, so thank you. And had I had them over the weekend, I would have had a wonderful time to peruse them, so thank you. I am going to take it up with our Chief Executive and the officers. Mr. Berryman Camp.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And just one thing with that, certainly completely took of the idea to supply our community board members and Lakes Board with the tablets. I must confess, I thought they already would have had them. But one thing too, it appears that a new SPNF agenda was sent out, which I think has overwritten the previous one. And the issue is I've actually annotated the previous one. So having received it and spent the time doing the notes on the board pack, it's now disappeared. So I think we have some process stuff that we need to work out.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you. The item 4, the presentations from the Bay of Plenty Regional Council from their annual plan, that is off today's agenda. That's been removed and will come in at another point. Thank you. Confirmation of our minutes of the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting held on the 16th of March 2017. Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Thank you, Councillor Gould. Are there any matters arising before I put that? Thank you. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Thank you. Carried. Now, we're on to our staff reports. Where am I? Page 12. Staff reports. The review of the Class 4 gambling and board review policy. May I have a mover and a seconder, please, that this be received? Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. Thank you, Councillor Bentley. It's been moved and seconded that the report be received. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Thank you. Good morning, Rosemary. Good morning. Thank you. I'm sorry.
Dr. Hewison.
Thank you, Dr. Hewison. Thank you. Good morning.
Yes, good morning. I'd like to introduce Dr. Grant Hewison. So Grant is a consultant in specialising in local government and gambling policy. So he's been supporting the rigour of this process, reviewing the policy, and it's been helpful to have that understanding of what's happening in other places and just have that external rigour. So I'm going to briefly go over that. I appreciate there was quite a bit of material to look at in the pack. So I'm going to go over some of the main points of that, and then I guess I have some questions and so on.
So I think many of us attended the workshop recently, so that was good. So this will refresh our minds on some of those points. Thank you.
Okay. So just a little bit about legislative requirements, just our requirement to review this policy under the Gambling Act and the Racing Act, and also to consider the relocation policy and taking into consideration the social impact of gambling in high deprivation communities. So our current policy establishes a cap of 380 machines. So it allows it sets a number for the number of machines per venue and around the relocation of venues if they need to change premises. And it also has some criteria and conditions around where places can be established and some rules around that, which is part of the relocation policy. So I won't go into detail, but suffice to say there's various measures in relation to sensitive sites that we don't have gambling facilities located close to. So at the moment, we've got, well, as of September, I don't think it's changed since then, we have the ability to have 389 machines are licensed. There are sometimes some temporary reductions why that number sometimes is a little bit less when there are people doing renovations and things like that. Basically, the effect of the policy has been a gradual reduction over times, but it's plateaued recently. There's been very little change. We have one TAB board venue in the central city, and there are 12 Class 4 societies operating. So the steps of the review, we've undertaken the social impact of gambling report, which was, I think, presented back in November. We had pre-engagement meetings with stakeholders in October. We undertook the gambling survey through APR consultants, and we discussed these findings with councillors at a workshop last month. Just briefly, some of the key points from those inputs. So the social impacts of gambling, there are some benefits that are seen, particularly in the grants to community groups. Just pointing out, not all the proceeds generated from Rotorua are necessarily directly returned to Rotorua. Most gamblers are recreational gamblers, and entertainment is a benefit for those people. The risks associated with gambling, so I think these are probably fairly well known. There are higher risks of regular gambling and becoming a problem gambler, association with crime, issues around work and study performance, depression, negative effect on physical health, particularly the impact on children of parents with a gambling problem, and the issue that Māori and Pacifica have higher rates of problem gambling than the general population. Some of the local trends which emerged from that social impact report are that Rotorua has a higher proportion of venues and machines than the national average, and that we have a higher spend than the national average, even though we have some lower socioeconomics compared to the national average. The initial engagement we undertook with stakeholders, we had 2 meetings, one with the people who are particularly associated with problem gambling situations, and they had a very strong view that they would support a sinking lid policy and no relocations, and the importance of ensuring any relocations, if they were to be relocated, couldn't be too close to schools or other sensitive sites. And the second meeting was the gambling societies and the industry, and there the view was really to maintain the status quo, and they had concerns that relocations should continue because of issues around their sustainability of business. The gambling survey, now there's a really full report, and there's a whole lot of cross-tabulations and so on, a lot of detail there that's there for your interest, but really just going to talk about the key points. So we used APR consultants for the survey. It was undertaken December, January, February, mostly telephone surveys supplemented by face-to-face and online surveys, and that was to meet the sampling frame so that we made sure we had good representation of all the key groups to have a good survey across. So it was just under 500 surveys we used, and there's just under a 5% margin of error. So some of the gambling habits emerging from that is basically a lot of people gamble. It's a very common thing. Most common is things like lotto, and just 40 people out of that sample of 508% have played a pokie machine in the last 6 months, not in a casino. And there's a little bit, the survey goes a lot more detail around the relative spending that people reported and so on, and from very small amounts to some quite large amounts. So the issue with the pokie machines is this was the area where the most money was spent compared to its popularity as a form of gambling activity. So yeah, an average of $1,400 over 6 months for the people who responded, and they visited places just over 30 times over that 6 months. Average spend of $44 a visit, and a total of $56,000 over a 6-month period. And in relation to problem gambling, the findings that there were basically 16.3% of the people in the survey said they'd been impacted by a gambler, and they talked about those effects being not being able to pay bills, affecting relationships, wasting money, losing savings, going bankrupt. So there are extensive comments collected from the survey. There was unprompted, what people said was recorded, and that's been coded into various topics throughout the survey. So that was the particular points from there. So in relation to what people thought about the number of machines in questions, most people said they wanted the number of machines to decrease. So 76.5% they said that, with 41% saying greatly decrease, and most people wanted the number of venues to also decrease, again 75%, with 35% saying greatly decrease. And then in relation to the question about what action the respondents thought council should take, most indicated that the numbers of pokie machines should be reduced. That was 87%, with just under about 50% saying reduced at a fast rate. So it gives you a bit of an idea what the general public, as opposed to any particular stakeholder group, is thinking about our pokie machines. In relation to the location, we've currently got 13 in the city centre and 13 in the suburbs. The issue was identified by a lot of people concerned about them in the suburbs, and particularly in relation to being in the lower socioeconomic areas and adjacent to those areas. And I think in the social impact report there's a map that clearly shows where those are located in relation to deprivation areas. And a majority, 60%, were opposed or strongly opposed to moving machines around venues in special circumstances. So we have some possible policy responses. We have to work within the Act and what we actually have the power the tools we have at our ability to use. So basically there are 4 options that we've looked at. The first is adopting a sinking lid with no relocations. The second is lowering the cap with no relocations. The third is to allow relocations, and the fourth is status quo, basically, with some very minor changes. So in relation to the first option, which I should say is the one we recommend based on the outcomes of the engagement, the surveys, and the social impact report and the councillor workshop. So the sinking lid no relocations, the effect of this, it limits the TAB and Class 4 venues to where they are currently, the existing venues. Not allowing relocations means that if a venue closes, the gambling machines at that venue can't be relocated, and so the number in the district would come down. This would be the most effective policy to reduce the number of venues and machines. We would expect this effect to be slow, but in the event that the effect reduces the number of machines to what we've calculated as the national average of 3.8 machines per 1,000 population, and we've set that at 273 machines, which is based on a projected Rotorua population 2018, so it's still a reduction of 100 machines across the district. We suggest that if we had this rapid reduction, that would trigger a reassessment of the policy to just determine if it was doing what we intended, and if there was any need to review any earlier. So the second option is to lower the cap with no relocations. So again, lowering the cap, and we're suggesting just 273 machines. That would limit the TAB and venues to the current locations. And no relocations in this case would mean that if a venue closes, the number of machines can't be relocated until that cap is reached, at which point that yes, they could be relocated. And that would be as effective as a sinking lid, but only until that cap was reached. The third option is to allow relocations, which you can adopt a sinking lid or lower the cap. Allow relocations. It limits people to the existing venues, but if they want to close at one location, they can be relocated to another, and that will be subject to looking again at the location restrictions and putting those back into a policy. This will be less effective at reducing the machines than a no relocations policy. The relocations are really quite a significant part of the tool as to how there's any reduction achieved. And the status quo, we can keep the cap at the current 380 machines, which we haven't quite reached with the previous policy. We can make adjustments to the current relocations provisions. In particular, there's a rule around the footpath distance, which was measured along the footpath rather than a radial distance, that had enabled a place to set up reasonably close to a school. But this policy is the least effective in reducing the gambling machines. So our next steps are really to decide an option from these presented, and then there'll be a consultation process with the community before a final report coming back to council and proposal.
Thank you very much, Rosemary. Thank you for that good overview. Well, thank you. We can open it up for questions and discussions now. Councillor Stewart, then Councillor Gould.
To the workshop, and since we discussed the several options, and we've got 4 options there, I have got some support for adopt a sinking lid, but allow relocations. Because if a landlord walks in and said your lease is expiring, for example, the Rucken Mall on the corner of Edawera Street and Amahia Street, and they've got a multi-purpose venue for TAB. They have got some gambling machines, but predominantly the 4 places, bar, entertainment and food. So if we allowed no relocations, that business would close, and they'd effectively be out of business. I don't think that's fair. I think we've got to be fair. I am all in favour of reducing the cap as indicated, but allow the circumstances of a relocation within the CBD. I would like to see that occur. I don't think that's fair that landlords can hold a gun at those that currently have the venues to say your rent's going up 40% because if you don't agree to it, you can't relocate. So that's why.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Stewart. I was of the opinion, Rosemary, that actually there is discretion there should such an incident arise.
Yeah, so I think that within the policy, there's still the ability for council to consider exceptional circumstances without actually writing what those circumstances, because there could be a lot actually into the policy, which would then leave us open to potential judicial review and all sorts of things. So it was suggested that we not put a whole lot of exceptional circumstances, identify those. I guess the other thing is that other places do have this policy, and that does have that effect, yes, that if somebody needs to close, then that's how we achieve a reduction, and it does have impacts for a business. I guess the other thing is that that's in relation to the gambling component of that business, which is not meant to be the major part of its business. So it's not the only part of a business.
Thank you, but it's a good example for us to be aware of. Councillor Gould, then your worship.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I can't comment on this report because it's got confidential throughout the pages, but I can make some personal opinions. I think 18 machines at some of those establishments is probably 1 or 2 machines too much. And I also think if you want to reduce gambling of those types of machines, if you take away the soft chairs or the chairs so people have to stand, then they're going to spend less time playing pokies, and which means they're going to walk away with more money in their pocket because they haven't gambled it all away.
Thank you, Councillor Gould. Your worship.
Just a question really, and Rosemary, you mentioned this 56,000 a month is on average the spend in Rotorua at the gambling machines. What's the return to us?
So the gambling societies are required to return, I think it's 40%.
40.
That's required.
And my other question is, when do we get an opportunity to review this again? Because I wasn't at the workshop, so what we decide today obviously locks us in till the next review process.
So the next review will be in 3 years' time.
Right.
So it's a relatively short space of time.
And my other question was, and I'll be brave and say it, you talk about the possibility of a high-class casino. Is that something that was a high response rate from the review?
There were a small number of people who commented, I guess, in relation to the siting of places that they had a preference to have things more centrally located rather than in the suburbs, and that's where some people talked about like a casino, that kind of concept. They felt that, some people felt that that was a more acceptable way for the machines to be available, and that potentially there was greater controls and scrutiny in a centre like that.
So if I could comment on that, and I chaired the Local Government Environment Responsible Gambling Bill, so I have an overview here, and I think the issue myself was when they introduced gambling in New Zealand in 1987, they actually, well, at the time, didn't look at the impact on gambling proliferation in the suburbs and, you know, and it may be better to think of centralising into, you know, and it would have to be a high-class casino if we ever did, and then decide to shut the suburbs down. And that was not considered at the time, I think, and we were left with this legacy that we're catching up all the time about the proliferation of gambling, and all of us agree that it's very difficult in the suburbs, especially the location and the ability to monitor and the impact on communities and children. So that's something when we go out with whatever we go out with and agree today, and I know what I like and will support, but I wonder if it's part of a question, you know, that's an aspect that we take back out to the community. I'd love to know what the support is there, because I don't think we've got the picture. We've all got the picture of what it is like in other parts of the country, and I'm sure everybody's been to visit them. But I'm thinking of a very different picture of a 5-class hotel with the top floor with very controlled gambling. And that's quite different to thinking of a monolithic casino. But it's whether we're going to be bold enough to include that in our whatever option that we take out, and that's not in the paper. You do mention here the location of pokie machines with the venues to be centralised, but either we face it in 3 years' time or we face it now, and I am being asked by several people who want to come in and develop in the inner city for vibrancy. Is there the possibility, and under the current Act there isn't, you'd have to have an amendment to the current Act, but that's something that we haven't really ever asked our community as we've evolved with understanding the impacts of gaming. You're not really having to answer that, but why wasn't that put in an option to go back out to our community? Because we haven't asked that.
So through you, Madam Chair, I guess the limitations of the Act and what we can actually do in this policy is around the Class 4 gaming machines. It's not relating to casinos, but I guess for the public's perspective that they did, to them it did raise that issue, so a small number made that comment that that would be preferable, and that's very much their perceptions. There's no, that we didn't prompt that response, it's simply what came through those responses. Oh, so I'll let Grant.
Perhaps if I just go a little bit further on that. So the current position is that there is a moratorium on any new casinos. So the difficulty in consulting the community on that is that option actually really isn't on the table at all. And if at some point in the future the government changed its view on that, then I think there might be an option that would be considered. So I think it's best not to encourage the community down that track too far, because it's not something this council can deliver. And the community actually gave you that feedback. So as Rosemary said, through the survey, you did get an unprompted response that a casino that was well controlled, well regulated, was a preferable option at some point in the future than the current situation. So that gives you some, if you like, sense of if discussions with government were possible or there was a sense of change, then you've got that information to take forward into that process.
Thank you. And I think at some stage in the future, that's probably going to be a discussion that will be had, not only here, but in other places around the country. There's quite a number of councillors want to speak now. Councillor Kumar, and then Ms Morrison.
Thank you, Chairperson. Good day, everyone. I'm going to touch something about what Mayor Chadwick had just touched as well. But before I do that, I think we are a little bit too PC about being too close to schools. Most of the schools close at 3 o'clock, 3:30. The casinos don't fully go into operation in the evening. So the kids are not loitering, hanging around casinos, aspiring to be there. We get too, I think, engulfed in trying to sort of being too PC there. Some of the casinos,
Venues,
venues,
gaming
that's
venues.
Yeah, the gaming machines. Some of them do open late at night, and when the jackpots are high, you will see a higher spike of people sort of coming in those nights. So that could be looked at. And the other thing is, because we're only looking at the gambling of the smaller pokie machines and as such at the moment, if we shut them down or put a lead, then it sort of gives the ones that are there already a higher stake as far as their businesses are concerned, because suddenly they are not going to be any more. So the ones that are already there, their stakes are already going to go high because no more is going to come because we've closed them off. So maybe a good review system is to be done is to, how can we say that the next entrepreneur shouldn't come through the pokey machine business, because they do contribute a lot to the community as well. The money that comes through Southern Trust, NZCT.
I have to say that there are some gaming venues that are open way before 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So they're lining up in some instances. Did you want to make a comment?
Yes,
thank you.
Just, Madam Chair, I think it is important to be clear that the policy won't force anyone to close down. So you've had in place essentially that policy or a similar policy, but you've had a cap. So you've had a sense of natural attrition of venues and machines over time. So there's no forcing of them to close down. And when the Act came in, essentially it grandfathered all of the existing venues and machines. So they all have an existing use, an existing right to be there. What the policy sets is that if a business decides it wants to close down, then that business and those machines are lost to the community, if you like, or removed from the community. But it's the decision of the business owner about whether they wish to do that or not. And so initially you had some decrease, but then it's plateaued out over time. Our expectation is, even if you adopted the policy that's been proposed of a sinking lid and no relocations, it's very unlikely that you're going to see any dramatic decrease in venues and machines over time. And in fact, the plateau is probably likely to stay where it is. But it sends a signal, and it provides an opportunity that if a venue and machines did close, then they could be removed. But as we said, it's a policy you can review every 3 years, and if you find there is some change at the end of that 3-year period, you can make some different choices about what you wish to make then.
Thank you, Dr. Hewitson. Ms Morrison?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've got 3 questions in relation to the suburbs, the cap and the trigger point. So the first one builds on Mayor Chadwick's kōrero about the suburbs. And in the survey, I heard you say that there was quite a strong voice of the community saying, actually, we want them out of the suburbs and we want them centralised. And I was just wondering, I don't see that reflected in the policy, and I just want to understand the sort of the thinking behind when you were formulating the policy, why that point hasn't been flowed through.
So in response to that, I guess the limits of the tools that we have to use are really quite limited. So we can't say, right, we're going to shut all of those and you must move. We don't have the ability to do that. We can only make the rules around where any new ones are and whether they can relocate or not.
Okay, cool. Thank you. The second one is about the following on from that, the trigger point. So, and apologies, I don't know the details around how the gambling licences are allocated, but it seems to be here the trigger point is as they close down. Is there also an opportunity for a trigger point to be any change in controlling interest in the business, or preventing them from transferring on sale? Because as a business, having a licence would add value to your business, and it appears that that's transferable. Am I correct?
Yeah, no, you are correct, and particularly the ownership of the machines can change, and the owner of the business can change as well. So the control you have is essentially around the current location. So if a business entirely closes and wants to move somewhere else, you can control that by either allowing that through a relocation policy, or saying no, you can't do that through a no relocation policy. And that's really your major tool that the government has decided that you have authority to make a choice about. So I think that, does that answer your sort of question?
So I just want clarity. We can't sort of put into the bylaw that another trigger point is a change in ownership or a controlling interest.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
What a bummer. What a bummer. And the last one is the cap. And so we've got in the policy that the cap or the review will be what is the current national average. And I was just wondering if we could be even bolder and say, that's the cap, or whatever the then current national average is, because perhaps by the time in 3 years we come up for review, actually the cap's fallen quite a lot in terms of national average, but ours will still be quite high. I just wonder if we could
It was quite
push the
difficult
boat
to
out
think
a bit
about
further.
what a number is. So rather than just have it not saying any number at which we'd review, to say that we actually, if it was effective and actually reached this number, we should reassess, and that's not the same as a review. So review would be to formally review the policy, but I think it's to reassess, should we be reviewing the policy earlier? And so it was a conservative, but I still don't think that we're likely, with even with using every tool available to us, I don't think that you would get a large reduction rapidly. I think whatever policy is set will be in its entirety for the 3 years before it would normally be reviewed.
The reason we did think about the idea of formula that might be based on the national average, but actually it's far easier and it's clearer to everyone that there is a number. And we've based that on essentially 2018 projections. That's about 100 machines less than what you've got now. And when you started back in 2003, when these policies were first put in place, to where you've got now, you've only made that difference over more than a decade. So if you set the cap at what the national average is and make it, if you like, a goal to get to, it's going to take quite some time to get to that goal. But it does indicate to your community where, at this point, you think that goal should be if you're wishing to go to a cap, which is essentially saying that's the national average, that's where we should be at a minimum, and we should be heading in that direction. And there's a number, and that's helpful for everyone to know what that number is, rather than a formula which will change every few months, effectively, or certainly on an annual basis.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you very much. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to acknowledge the work done on the survey and the workshop and the report. I think it gives us a very good steer on where our community thinks this policy should sit, and I certainly support option 1. I note in the discussion on option 1 and on page 17 that there is the opportunity for council to make decisions inconsistent with the policy, and we've done that in the past in my time on council. So it's definitely an option to consider a relocation on its merits at some future point in time. But we're not locking anything in today. We're putting out a proposal for public special consultation. There's a lot of water to go under the bridge, and there'll be a lot of political lobbying, and I'm sure. So, Madam Chair, with those few words, you know, the scenarios that have been painted, they can be considered under an inconsistent decision review, but I certainly support option 1 and would be happy to move 2 and 3 of the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. There are still some other councillors. Thank you very much for that. And thank you, Your Worship.
It might be useful just to explain
Yes, please.
the inconsistent policy, because I acknowledge the question and comment, Councillor, you made before about a business that feels it's been disadvantaged in a sense of if you have a no relocation policy. So under the Local Government Act, a council, when it sets a policy, must act consistently with it, but it can make inconsistent decisions. So there's a provision in Section 80 of the Act that allows you to do that. What that means in terms of this policy is that you can send a signal to the whole community that you're wishing to take a stand which is related to the feedback and the concern. I suppose that's come through that. But to those operators that do feel they're in a position where perhaps, you know, they're going to be up for a lease review in the next 2 or 3 years and may feel there's some disadvantage, then you can also say, look, we can make an inconsistent decision, but it's up to you as the operator or to come to us with a business case, if you like, or with a report that's been fully put together that argues clearly why you think we should act inconsistently with our policy, and then we will judge that on a kind of wider set of discretion that we have. That means that you're not locked into trying to anticipate now what that might be. So you could have an exception that says where there's a lease up for renewal, but you get into a much more difficult position about how to judge that if you put it in the policy. You're much better off saying we're happy to consider special or extraordinary circumstances. You bring a business case to us about why that we should decide that way, and we'll consider that thoroughly and properly, and we'll make a decision based on that. That means it's up to the operator to make that case to you rather than the other way around. I think it's a better position to be in. Yeah, but you can communicate to your operators that you've adopted this policy with that in mind, so they're not completely locked out of a relocation should a business case be put forward that you think, as a council, meets all of the kind of tests you'd like to have met.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Hewletson, for that explanation. Councillor Tapsell, then Mr. Berriman-Kemp.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you both for your presentation. I'm glad you've just clarified that, because that was my question exactly. But do we still pose the risk of going out with a policy that looks too soft if we're going to be allowing extraordinary circumstances? Because if we're really going to be having a hard stance on this, which I think we need to, because I'm very disappointed that we've reached well above the national average for machines, and we now know that our people on average are spending $3,000 a year. So do we hold the risk of being too soft on that so that they're not taking it seriously and we're not putting that message out that we need to be reducing it, especially in our suburbs?
So that as a decision-making body subject to the Local Government Act, but also, if you like, the concept of reasonableness whenever you make a decision. If someone does come to you and asks you to make a decision, albeit inconsistent with the policy, you have to make that decision reasonably. Okay, so that you, in a way, you can't escape that option being brought to you. Now, it may be that as a body, you feel that the business case of my lease is coming up for renewal and my landlord's indicated he's going to increase it by a substantial amount may not meet what you think are the needs of your wider community at that point in time. But you still have to, if someone presents that to you, make a reasonable decision. Okay. In terms of the policy that has been proposed, it's the best position you can take, if you like, or it's probably the hardest position you can take in terms of what you are entitled to do as a council under the legislation. So the government has limited your ability as a council in terms of what you can do to essentially do you allow relocations or not as a key policy lever. And if you take a position of no relocations in a policy and a sinking lid rather than a cap, that's the, if you like, the strongest position that you can take in terms of that particular policy. So it's not soft. It's actually very strong, but unfortunately, that's the limit of what you can achieve, subject to your legal constraints and the wider legal constraint of if someone asks you to make a decision and it's inconsistent with the policy, you still have to treat that decision making in a reasonable way. And you may decide no, but it comes back to their position that you have to be reasonable.
Thank you. Mr. Berryman-Kemp?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So what I would like to do is just to talk of the comments from Ms Morrison and Councillor Tapsell too. Whilst I understand what your rationale is, and obviously from where I'm going to, I also support the recommendation. However, my concern about the sinking lid cap is actually given over 3/4 of our community, based on the consultation document, indicated they want a reduction. Given we're overrepresented in terms of number of venues, number of machines, amount of spend and amount of harm, one would think a reduction down to the national level is actually not very aspirational. And I guess my question is not so much for you, but actually for the council. Do we want to set aspirational goals? Given we're going through our 2030 consultation now, it would seem to me that if on page 24, we have 5.9 machines available for every 1,000 people versus a national average of 3.8. That means we have 55% more machines. Wouldn't you set an aspirational target below national average to send a clear signal to our community that we've listened and that we want to work to that point? I get the likelihood of achieving that is relatively low, but for me this is about setting aspirational goals and recognising what the community is asking for. So what I'm doing is actually just supporting, obviously, that we should go down with the recommendation, but I think we need to be more aspirational in terms of our goal setting.
I could comment on, so a sinking lid, if you like, is an aspiration of effectively zero. Yeah, so it's saying we're not going to put in place a cap that says once you reach that, then other machines could. So what would happen is if you reached a cap and someone's venue closed and their machines went, then though someone else could start a business and bring those machines back and bring it back up to the cap. Okay, with a sinking lid, they just goes, so it just sinks over time. And eventually, at some point, it would reach zero if that was where you wanted to go. What we've also put in the policy, though, is a tool for a reassessment. So if you got to a position where you were at the national average, then what we've suggested is that if you had a cap, so if you decide to go with a cap option, when it got to that cap level, we've said there would be a reassessment there as to whether you'd like to reduce that cap further or keep it at that level. And and it applies to the sinking lid as well. So there is an option of at that point reassessing things. But as you've said and acknowledged, it will take some time to get to that point, and you have a review option every 3 years anyway. So it may be in 9 or 10 years that you'll get to the position of doing that. And in the meantime, you may have changed your view on what the policy should be. So I think even if you went for a cap, that's actually quite an aspirational goal to set as a council to reach down to that level. You can, if you like, make it even lower, but actually the best position, if you're wanting to be aspirational, is sinking lid.
Thank you. Thank you for that good explanation. Yes, Your Worship.
I want to speak in support of the remit, and this is very, very similar to managing smoking down. So we set the goal, and it seemed lofty, 2050, smoke-free New Zealand. Are we getting there? Slowly, over time. And this is a public health issue, really. The effects of gambling are a public health issue on a community. So this is the policy that gets us there. We had higher rates, and that is something that we're confronting and we're dealing with by how we vote on this recommendation. And over time, slowly, behaviour changes. So it is a public health mechanism where you socialise with our community the effects of gambling and the harm, and then you slowly reduce and change behaviour over time, while at the same time supporting services for those that have got the real harm in a gambling problem. So it's a public health approach, and you do it over time, and you bring the community with you. You don't slam dunk the community, and I think this is the best solution, and that's why I support it, understanding that you've got to have all the other aspects in place about education, about harm reduction, and about actual treatment for those that have true addiction. So I support that this recommendation on those grounds.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Hunt, then Councillor Stewart.
Thank you. I support the recommendation, and while I think it's fantastic to have an aspirational goal, it needs to be realistic. Otherwise, we're sending false hope out to the community that we're going to do this more quickly than we know is likely to happen. And the survey has simply been the basis to form the position we're in of going out for a special consultative process. The rest of the community, other than those 489 who were surveyed, are now going to have the opportunity to send their views, and we'll sit and listen, and they will be wide and varied. I pretty much think they'll probably reflect the survey, and it'll be interesting to see that. So I do support it. I think it's a realistic goal. It is a sinking lid. And I'd hate to give false hope to the community that we're actually going to be able to make some significant changes quickly, because it's not quickly. It's a very slow process over time.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. Councillor Stewart, and then we're going to put them to motion.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry. In reading the APR report, and I take on board what Councillor Gould was saying, can't be specific in terms of what is in the report, but I certainly got a clear signal from this report, having read it, that our community want these out of the suburbs. And I agree. I think we need to take a bolder step to reduce the cap even further. And I think the sinking lid, signalling it to the community about a sinking lid with no relocations, but with the proviso, and I'm not going to vote because I want to hear what the public say. On pages 127, 128 and 129 of APR's report, there is a strong drive from the community that we get rid of these pokey bars and that we have a high-class casino to eliminate the people that are the problem gamblers and the controls in that. And there's only 5 people further on who say that Rotorua should never, ever, ever get a casino. And yet it's inundated on pages 127, 128 and 129, people saying, we believe whoever approved it in the past got it wrong. Queenstown have got 2 casinos, they're boutique casinos. Rotorua is a tourism capital and has nothing. So I'm not going to support either of the 4 options, because I think we need to hear what our community have to say. Because I have some sympathy, Madam Chair, that our cap is too high.
Thank you. Well, we all want to hear what the community has to say, and I think if you look at 3 there, that's what we're suggesting there. So I'm going to put the 2 and 3. Thank you for the discussion this morning. That the committee recommend to Council that consideration has been given to the requirements of the Gambling Act 2003, the Racing Act 2003 and the Local Government Act 2002, and it is proposed to replace the current policy with a replacement RLC Class 4 gambling and board venue policy as attached to this report. 3, that the committee recommend to Council the statement of proposal and proposed replacement RLC Class 4 gambling and board venue policy to be approved for special consultation, and that Council hear and deliberate on any public submissions made to the replacement policy. I'll put that now. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Thank you. Carried.
Madam
yes.
Chair, Madam Chair, would it be noted that I took no part in the discussion or the vote?
Thank you, Councillor Maxwell.
Be noted, I abstain.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Thank you for that. Before we move to recommendation 2, our Chief Executive would like to give us an update on the storm, I think, that's brewing or coming or here. Thank you.
So, councillors, please excuse my dropping in and out a little bit. What I was doing was just getting an update from...
Excuse me, Dr. Hewitson, thank you very much for this morning's presentation. Thank you. Beg your pardon. Thank you.
That's right. From staff about where we are at the moment. So just so you know, the staff around our emergency response have been preparing for the last 3 days as to how to look at the risks and to how those risks can be mitigated. And so what was occurring and has just finished downstairs is a further briefing to make sure that we've covered off all of the eventualities. Now, the good news is that we've just received an update from Met Service with regards to the tracking of the storm, and it seems like at this particular moment Rotorua is not seen as a high-risk area. Although, having said that, I think we should be careful to say that that doesn't mean we're without risk. It means that we've got a lower risk. The areas that, of course, have been highlighted is really the coast, Tauranga, Western Bay, and then, of course, down to Whakatane and the inland areas into Edgecombe. So that's really where the emphasis from the civil defence point of view is looking at the moment. But nevertheless, our team is very focused on Rotorua. In terms of background, we've put, for example, into place emergency housing options for people should they be displaced overnight from houses. So we have got emergency housing in place. Certainly the marae have really been, the marae network have been outstanding in this and have very much opened their doors in the event that this was actually needed. At the same time, the Ministry of Education are closing schools at midday today, again in preparedness as to a weather event later in the day. So, and also we've got our emergency services, police and fire and so on, also on standby mode. At this particular time, though, we haven't, as of about an hour ago, received any calls from anyone expressing concern as to water or inundation. So we haven't got a situation as of the moment, but of course that can change as the day moves forward. We've got our call centre will operate throughout the night effectively with backup from Watchdog's call centre as well, so we're not missing calls. We've got Higgins and Infracore both on standby to provide assistance as necessary. One of the things that you should know about, though, is that the brief for our staff and for the contractors also is that where there is no need to respond to an emergency situation, we will not do so. What we do not want to do is, for example, to have small slips or trees over in situations where there is no road closure, there's no risk to safety, and we're putting at risk at the same time contractors or our own staff in those situations. So the brief is that where there is no apparent or obvious risk, and the obvious ones are where you see small slips on the sides of roads and so on, or even where you're getting some inundation of sections and lower levels. So those are the situations that we would be expressing, making sure that the people who are phoning us looking for assistance, that they are safe. There's no immediate risk to their house. There's no potential safety risk to their family in any way whatsoever, we'll be talking those people through to basically keeping us in touch with what's happening for them, but we would not be responding to those sort of calls. Where our priority goes is where there is potential household inundation, where people or individuals are actually clearly at risk or being placed at risk in a situation which may be slips or trees or any of those events. That's where our priority goes. So that's the triaging that goes on in a situation such as this. Our Emergency Operations Centre is not currently activated, and it will only be activated once we reach a threshold of about 15 calls in an hour period. At that moment, we'll activate the Emergency Centre and we'll move into a more of emergency management mode at that point. Most of, in the Bay of Plenty, as I say, emergency services and civil defence focuses around those high-risk areas, which are mostly around the coast and the Whakatane area. So we're really in a preparatory mode, watching what's happening, looking at what we can do as preventative measures. The wastewater storage ponds, now this is treated wastewater, in the forest is down to about 20% of its down to 20% capacity as of about 5 o'clock this morning. So there's a lot of capacity sitting there to be able to move water into those containment ponds. But nevertheless, in a super deluge, we can't guarantee that we're going to be able to maintain that. So that's where in the last two events we've ended up with, fortunately, with spills into the lake. Having said that, that is actually, you should be aware that this is one treated wastewater and it's also going into the Sulphur Point area. Now that's not a normal lake situation, it's highly acidic. And is an area of the lake where there's minimum likely of any potential impact at all. Obviously, where those events occur, we're immediately notifying both the Regional Council and Rotorua, and if there is any question with regards to public safety or public health, we're putting notices out and so on. So that's really pretty much where we're up to at the moment. We've at this moment, as is Tauranga, we have moved our staff back from Whakatane. So we've got capacity in Rotorua at the moment to deal with any eventuality that may occur in this district. Having said that, Civil Defence and Whakatane is confident that they have actually got adequate support to cater for the issues or challenges that may occur there at the moment at this time. That resource deployment may change over the next 12-24 hours as we start seeing risk for the Broad Bay of Plenty playing out in particular areas. Then it's highly likely that we may see staff deployed from our area into those higher need areas if that's actually required. So that's where we are at the moment.
Yes, Your Worship.
Thank you, Jeff. And that is the clarification that we all need. And if you can direct people, especially on social media, to the Lakes Council website, there are updates going on there, and you could use those as attachments so that we're not scattering the information to the public, and we could put out, refer to the Lakes Council website, which we're updating frequently. And the other aspect that under this Act, it's Stavros Michael who is our local controller. So all inquiries are centralised through to Stavros Michael. And I think if you could also point out JP's role. So we're very clear this is the new Act and it's our preparedness under the new Act.
So Stavros is the controller and JP is available as a backup. But what I want to emphasise is I do not want to see calls directly to Stavros. It cannot happen. We've got to have any affected residents dealing directly through our call centre. That's vitally important because the call centre is not just there to take calls. What they're doing is registering people tracking people, making sure people are safe, and all of the information captured through the call centre is passed to the Emergency Operations Centre. So they, through that call centre contact, are keeping a minute-by-minute track on people who are phoning and what their status is in any particular situation. So what that allows us to do, of course, is that if there are affected households, then we know what's happening for them. If they are evacuated, we know where they are and where they're going and that they're safe. And that can only occur when there is centralised communication systems in place.
Thank you. There's a couple of questions from councillors. Councillor Bentley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question for the Chief Executive. Have we had or do we have people on the ground in Edgecombe to assist them in their plight?
Yes, we have. So JP has been himself acting as a controller in the Edgecombe area on the response. So the reason for that being is to provide relief and assistance to the controllers. At the same time, we have had building staff, engineering staff providing assistance directly into the area, and we've had Infocor also actually providing direct contracting support into some of the infrastructure.
Thank you. Councillor Sturt.
Whilst you said that it isn't tracking to Rotorua, certainly this morning's bulletins from 5 o'clock onwards said that it would hit Rotorua about 1 o'clock. So if it's not tracking you, where's it tracking to? Who's it? Is it Makatu? Is it Matamata? Is it Western Bay?
So I wanted to just clarify that I was actually, this is a risk assessment. So what the risk assessment is saying is that Rotorua is of a lower risk. That doesn't mean we're without risk. So this is a wide storm front that is effectively tracking down the coast. So we will most certainly see high rainfall and potentially wind with an area. We can expect to see that. All I'm saying is that we're at a lower level of risk. The central storm, though, the risk areas for the Bay of Plenty are the coast, Tauranga, Western Bay, Whakatane, and obviously also the plain with Edgecombe in the middle.
Yeah, through you. We have got resources. Should there be an issue on the lake edge, particularly with the wind blowing from the northerly area up onto, or I'm talking about the properties at Kawau Point, round the point to the lakefront. They are experiencing inundation at the moment, but if the lake rises even further, it's the wind that's causing the problem, not the lake level. We have got processes in place to react to that if those people need to be evacuated.
Absolutely. So to be clear, the priority and the focus of the emergency response is to ensure public safety and support. And we most absolutely have got the support. What we would normally do if a family contacts our call centre and indicates that there is inundation happening, we would certainly be talking them through what their own plan would be. So it's critical that all residents do actually think through what would they do in the first instance, and that may be simply is move to other family members. So people should actually have a plan themselves as to what they would do. In the instance, though, where people find themselves, though, without resource and no options, then our support kicks in, and we have got a range of options that we're able to make available. And as I say, I think it's the response that we've got from iwi hapu here to Open Marae available for providing housing assistance is just showing the strength in Rotorua as to what actually is available. So there are emergency options if they are needed, but as I say, this again accentuates the importance for us all to be thinking through what are our own personal plans, how do we keep ourselves safe. The question though becomes is that there are at times expectations conveyed to our staff. My section has been inundated, my fence is in imminent collapse, my garage is potentially going to be inundated, and quite fundamentally that's where we will not be necessarily providing assistance. That fundamentally would not be a priority.
Thank you. Councillor Gould and Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Question for the Chief Executive. With the call centre at night, are extra staff going to be allocated there in the next couple of days? Because I think it might be, if you do have problems at night time, you might want to have extra people on to answer the calls. And people with laptops will have no problem communicating between you and the council, but people with hard tops, hooked into the power system, if they lose the power, then they won't be able to communicate with the council using the computer system. So they probably, in a case like that, they need to talk to their neighbours and see which neighbour has got a laptop and which neighbour can assist them better than council.
So just to clarify, our call centre normally at the close of business is actually moved over to Watchdog Security, so that's not happening. So we've got staff on providing that coverage throughout the night. So that's our call centre, will continue to operate, and so it will actually be staffed to a level that's needed. But over and above that, what we effectively do in these sort of situations is to provide the capacity of both call centres. So Watchdog Security's call centre is also operating and will continue to do so. Any calls that are not able to be taken through our call centre will therefore be diverted to Watchdogs. So we've got effectively the capacity of two call centres available if we actually have a high volume of calls coming into the area.
Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It was just one point through you, Jeff, that you perhaps didn't address, but it's been in media statements put out, is that lake levels are managed by the Bay of Plenty Regional Council. The only two with artificial controls on them are Lake Rotorua and Lake Okaraka, and it's my understanding is that both of those have had no restrictions to the water getting away for at least 2 weeks. So anything that can flow away is flowing away. It's nature will take its course.
That's correct.
Ms Morrison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Jeff. I just was wondering what we're doing proactively as a council to assure our tenants, who are often our most vulnerable members of the community and living alone, that they'll have access to the resources, or that they're going to be okay during the storm. Just thinking especially our pensioner flats.
Thank you. Yes, Your Worship, I appreciate your comment.
Yes, look, I'm the member on the Civil Defence Emergency Management group, and Rotorua has gone out on a bit of a limb here and kept Linda Hudson on staff. So her role has been to educate her, run workshops on Marais, community workshops about preparedness. So we have on the ground a staff member that is actively working in the community and with council, and we're the only local authority that held that capacity back and didn't put it into the central control group, which was standing to do it our way. And so I believe with her level of engagement with community groups, that preparedness is as good as it could be.
Yes, I just wonder though, is that talking about our pensioners, I mean, I presume there's been some quick whip around there to inform them that this is coming, and I hope so, because they are quite vulnerable.
Look, this is I think going to the question of our future social housing provision and a social housing trust, and the nature of the service that we need to be and want to be providing in the future. We're not at that point at the moment. We have got our property team which is doing what they can to have contact, but broader than that we've actually haven't got a role. Look, I think one of the things I should also mention is that there's really the two phases in any emergency situation, and bearing in mind that we haven't got an emergency situation at the moment, we haven't activated our emergency centre. But when we, or if we do, its focus is on actually managing the situation and managing immediate risk, obviously in the first instance ensuring safety. That's really its first primary goal. As the emergency, though, changes and as the storm event, for example, moves away, there's a change of focus and it moves into a recovery mode. And at the point of the recovery mode, there are a different set of conversations happening. So at that stage, people could be saying, look, part of my section's been washed away, I've got problems with pooling or flooding on the back of my property and the water's not going. I've got drainage has been lost, my water's off, my power's off, my road has got damage to it. At that moment, the if you like, the settings are adjusted, and as we move into recovery, those are the discussions that's starting to occur. It's important that during the emergency, the period of the emergency, we are really focused on making sure that our primary goal, making sure that people are safe, that the welfare is and welfare support's in place, that's really where we are. As it moves through, though, we start actually having different conversations about the damage to property, the recovery of property, looking at our own infrastructure, ensuring that sewer lines, water supply lines, all of the utilities that are normally provided continue to be provided in an effective manner. So it's important that there are two phases for this. What we can't do is mix those conversations up. During the time of emergency, what we can't be doing is trying to look at property recovery or trying to undertake work that fundamentally is not a priority during the time of the emergency.
Thank you, Jeff. Mr. Berriman-Camp?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And just two quick things. First of all, and Jeff, thank you for the update. Certainly that was one of the questions that we had. One thing, I was interested in the emergency housing options, and whilst I appreciate the Rotorua residents, one of the things that we received this morning from Jude, the two people from Ruatahuna popped into the Te Tātou office recently because they couldn't get home because the roads there are closed. So I do wonder whether or not there needs to be some sort of comms in terms of our role to support those who, because of the storm, are unable to get back to their homes, and whether or not we kick into that point. And just the second point before you answer that, because I might forget, is I appreciate the update on the water treatment plant. That sounds really good. Might I suggest in terms of relationship management, it could be prudent to update not only Toitiora and Bay Plenty Regional Council, but also the hapu in particular who are affected and who of course have a issue with discharge over that land. Therefore, if they're giving a heads up, that's more of a courtesy and a relationship management thing. Don't have to answer that, I'll leave that with you. But
Yeah. Do you want to respond to that last one?
Yes.
Thank you.
So the last two weather events that caused an overflow were fully discussed at a project steering committee within the last 7 days, and all those hapu and iwi were present and understand the scenario that could occur in another wet weather event. Interestingly, the last one put in 77 million litres in a 24-hour period into that plant, which is well above the previous record of 44 million litres, and normally it handles 22 million litres a day. So,
thank you. As to whānau from Ruatahuna.
If I can say, in times like this, I think if people make contact with our call centre, we will actually work with them regardless of where they're from. And the discussions with them will be as a discussion that we'd have with even our own residents, along the lines of, so where are you? What are your options? And what have you thought about? You know, have you got family? Whānau actually in Rotorua, have you got any friends here? So we're talking them through a plan that they may be able to make for themselves. And then of course as a last resort we will use our housing and emergency options if that's actually needed.
Thank you. JP?
Just adding to that, and with what I've been doing across at Whakatane over the last sort of 4 or 5 nights, they have been registering everyone who has been or has issues with either accommodation, their location or access. So if they are here and they've been cut off here, but they are from the Whakatane district, it's still important for them to make sure they register There's a number of sort of forms you can fill in online to put in their contact details, or to ring Whakatane District Council as well. We can pass messages on, but it's probably important to also make sure that they're registered in their home district, and in that way they will get the specific information as to when roads are open, and any support services that are ramping up within Whakatane will have a specific registration for them, and obviously will be aware of where they are, because I think what they've experienced in Whakatane is a fantastic community response. There's something like 1,700 registrations that have been picked up by the Whakatane District Council, and the vast majority of people have gone into friends and family for support. So their pressures on accommodation have been quite low, considering the number of people affected, particularly out of Edgecombe. So it's been a fantastic community response, but those registrations are really important to make sure that people can get the most up-to-date information, and as they ramp up all those wraparound support services, that they have those contact details to get hold of people to provide that support. So if you can encourage that messaging back, and as I say, we have a role in helping out as best we can for those that are caught within our district, but they need to make sure that they're also registered in their home district.
Thank you very much for that update. Before we move on to recommendation 2, I'd like to take a 5-minute adjournment, please. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, councillors. We'll resume our meeting. And I do have a early departure for, I think, physio from Councillor Sturt. He's had to go to an 11 o'clock appointment.
Can I also signal, I do have a meeting at 2 o'clock, which is when we were due to finish anyway.
Thank you. I'd like to think I'll be... You might be here meeting on your own. Well, I am going to move on now. Recommendation 2, statements of intent for council-controlled organisations for the year commencing the 1st of July 2017. I'd like to call for a mover and a seconder, and I'm going to put these points 1 and 2, I'll run them together. Thank you, Councillor Gould. That the report, statements of intent for council-controlled organisations for the year commencing the 1st of July 2017 be received, and 2, that the committee resolves to make comment on the draft statements of intent for Infracore Limited, Terex Limited Partnership, Rotorua Regional Airport Limited and Rotorua Economic Development Limited as outlined in the report, and forward comments to council for their review. I'll put that now, 1 and 2. All those in favour, please say aye. Oh, it was, sorry, beg your pardon, it was Councillor Bentley, thank you. Move Councillor Gould, seconded Councillor Bentley. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye, thank you, carried. Now, Thomas, good morning. Kia ora kōrua, thank you. You're going to speak, is it? Oh no, we've got to pull a PowerPoint presentation, have we?
No, I haven't done a PowerPoint
That's
presentation,
fine.
Madam Chair. So just a very brief overview. Obviously take the report as given
Yes,
as read.
thank you for that.
So once a year our council-controlled organisations are required to provide us with copies of their draft statement of intents before they are finalised, and council has 2 months to provide feedback. The statement of intents were received and have been reviewed by staff, and you'll see there that there are some comments there which we feel are appropriate to feed back to them, to the boards with regards to finalising their statement of intents. However, we welcome any questions and any other feedback and any other suggestions that the committee and then ultimately the council wishes is appropriate to provide feedback. Andrew is with me and he'll be able to answer any questions relating to the airport and Rotorua Economic Development, as he's been working closely with them, and I will try to answer any questions around T-Rex and Infracore.
Thank you. I think we might start with Infracore. Yes, Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've got 2 questions. One is in relation to Infracore. Thomas, can you remind me that with this CCO, unlike the airport, we haven't transferred over the land assets to the CCO, the nursery and the site at Vaughan's Road. They're not under their control, is that correct?
That's correct. The land holdings are still owned by council and are leased across. The only assets that were transferred across was plant and equipment, vehicles, etc. Yep.
Thank you. There was no PowerPoint from Infracore, no, thank you. So we'll just move through the CCOs, and if there are any comments on Infracore, thank you. Yes, Miss Morrison.
You have to...
No, that's fine, take your time.
Apologise. Something's happened with my Stella and it's just died, so I will try to find the reference page.
Yes.
I just had
Page 41.
Page 41. I just had one question, and it's just in relation to one of the targets, I think it was, and it said something along the lines of a 0% growth target. It was in one of the, and I just was wondering if I was reading that wrong, because I saw in their statement of intent there was some quite strong KPIs around growing the value and growing the revenue. It was page 52, I think.
Performance targets on 52?
Yeah, it's not in this hard copy, but I remember on the soft copy version that there was like a 0, but I was just wondering if that was
yes,
a placeholder or if it was a not less than 0 target.
My apologies that the first agenda that went out included, I attached the wrong draft of the statement of intent to it, and there were issues where there were zeros and X's, which is why the copy that was circulated about 20 minutes later has included the correct information. So hopefully that's resolved that for you.
Thank you.
Six on page 12 of the second draft. Growth in turnover, total turnover increased by 0% or more, which means don't lose money, but we're just interested in...
Are you wanting a figure there?
No, I'm just interested in why it's 0.
We'll ask that question. Obviously, we missed that one, so we will ask the question as to why that is 0 and not higher. Yep.
Thank you, Ms Morrison. Councillor Gould.
Yeah, thank you for your report today. I need to read something out from page 38, then I'll ask a question relevant to it. It said each council-controlled organisation is required to have a statement of intent in place by the 30th of June, and then it said the requirements for the board must submit a draft SOI by council by 1st of March. Council may make comments of the draft within 2 months of receiving the SOI, which is end of April. The board must consider any comments on the draft SOI and deliver the completed SOI on or before the 30th of June. I'd just like to point out that we've got a full council meeting on the 29th of June, and would it be better to say in that report the 28th of June if they want to submit a full report to council, so that we as councillors get a copy of it on the 29th of June? And the other question is, should a financial report be received on T-Rex, because it does make no mention of any financial figures on the T-Rex part of this report? And what's the implications of the T-Rex account from 1 July this year to the 30th of June next year, which will affect our annual plan submission process, which we have to debate and finalise on the 29th of June?
There were a number of points there. Thank you, Councillor Gould. Thomas?
If I'm willing, Madam Chair, I'll answer the T-Rex ones when we get to T-Rex.
Thank you.
With regards to the question around the final ones coming back to the June council meeting, it's not normal practice to table the ones back at council. Ultimately, the boards approve their own statement of intents once they've taken on feedback and then provide council copies of those. We can circulate them to you, but it's not a requirement to have a council agenda and doesn't require any further council approval. It is a board approval of the statement of intent.
Yes, thank you. Yes, we don't bat to and fro. Thank you for that. Councillor Tapsell.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you both for being available to answer these questions. I did think that maybe some of the CCO members themselves would be here, but that's okay. I did have a question on about they put a lot of emphasis on new projects, but also a lot of emphasis on existing projects. So I was just wondering if there's a weighting that they are putting on those. Really, it's because I'm trying to ensure that the quality of what they are doing here for the Lakes Council will be maintained.
That's a very good question. So the board have made it very clear to the management of that organisation that while they're interested in growing the revenue base of the company, it can't undermine what it's already looking to achieve and can't undermine the quality that it's currently giving back to the Rotorua district. So that is that fine balance that they are fully aware of, and making sure that they're not overstretching themselves as they try to pick up new work that will therefore impact on their service delivery back to us. Did that answer your question? Okay.
Thank you. Perhaps we can move now to Terex Limited Partnership, page 55. Yes, Mr. Berryman Kemp. Oh, Mr. Berryman Kemp, thank you.
Yes. So thank you, Madam Chair. Just two things regarding that. First of all, maybe the first thing is just a comment in terms of the SOI. I must just a comment to pass on to the board. I'm not that comfortable with the graphic they've chosen on the front, saying creating value from waste, with two Māori boys sitting in a stream. So perhaps they need to reconsider that graphic. But my question is actually, I'm unsure about the relevance of the Terex SOI, given the previous meeting where actually I've just realised this is probably confidential. So we should cover that up, but I'm just questioning the relevance. But I wonder, Madam Chair, I've just realised, will we be able to revisit this during the confidential board-only session?
If it relates to the statement of intent, we should be speaking about it, discussing it now.
Yep.
It's open.
So, Madam Chair, there are some things I'd probably like to comment on confidential after. I think where we're angling from is Council's decision to not include Terex into its annual plan for next year with regards to constructing the pilot plant, or the plant itself for us. And the rationale behind that was obviously the priority around the wastewater treatment plant and the consent application and understanding how Terex now fit into those new requirements, whereas Terex before was focusing on the old plant design. And so just pausing while we resolve that to then make a decision in the future. It's important to know that Terex isn't there and isn't the delivery vehicle to build that plant. That's our plant. Terex is there to improve and create value in the intellectual property, and obviously we're leveraging off that by building the plant when or if we get to that point, but they've still got other performance measures to unlock the commercial value of that. And I can give you a bit of an update in confidential with regards to 3 very strong leads that they have, actually overseas, as well as also pursuing further leads in New Zealand. With regards to our decision not to proceed at the moment, that we have been talking to Scion about the funding of this organisation over the next 12 months, and it is getting scaled back significantly, and we're considering as to whether it needs to be pulled back further as well. But we are going back to the board of Terex, and obviously subject to some of this feedback as well, to say, well, what do you now see yourself doing over the next 12 months in light of our decision? Where are your areas of focus going to be? What are those performance measures? And obviously making sure that they deliver on those and meet our expectations. So there is a little bit more work to do over the coming months with regards to Terex, its statement of intent and what it's looking to achieve over the next 12 months.
Thank you. Councillor Gould, you had a question in relation to Terex. Did you want to repeat that? I can't actually remember what it was.
The financial part, for the annual plan process, what do we have to take into account from 1/7 this year to the 30th of June the following year? Well, how much is it going to cost Council? You know, I'm talking about wages or the operational of the TRX operation over a 12-month period, ACC levies, tax liabilities, just different things like that. So we, whether this is going to be a cost to council of 100,000 or 200,000 or 300,000, whatever it's going to be, at least we need some sort of advice for the annual plan process.
So Councillor, we are aware of that, and we have included that in our annual plan, and the annual funding of 400,000 is being reduced to 250,000 as we speak. I guess you probably highlighted on the comment on page 39 is that one of the, probably a weakness maybe of the statement of intent is it doesn't provide that transparency in there, and that might be valuable to some readers, so we will be asking them to include some of that information in their statement of intent. But with regards to our budgeting purposes, we're fully aware of the funding required. It's already included in our annual plan, and there's no issues with regards to accommodating that.
Thank you, Your Worship.
So I'm happy with that answer, especially in the performance targets of that state maximise the value of the limited partners' investment and minimise their ongoing costs. Perhaps that's where the reduction in ongoing costs could be reflected. I can see where other councillors are coming from. We can't see it here. I'm happy with the way the statement of intent is crafted, but the transparency seems to be the call from other councillors, and where we can reflect that transparency in the statement of intent.
Further questions on TRX? Thank you. To the Rotorua Regional Airport Limited, page 63, or on your tablet. Questions or comments on the Rotorua Regional Airport Limited? Statement of intent? Thank you. The Rotorua Economic Development Limited. Oh, sorry, Councillor Donaldson. That's the
RED one.
Thank you.
I just had a couple of comments. It's really nice to see on page 91 that they've stretched their target for the visitor economy from 1 billion to 1.5 billion by 2030. So it's good to see that. I agree with the comments about some of the... I'm a bit lost, and I'd seek clarification on what NPS stands for. It's not National Policy Statement, but on page 94 we've got the Rotorua Tourism Investment Partnership, which I understand is going through a process of review. And the score there for greater than or equal to 80%, is it? Satisfaction with that partnership. And I just wonder what NPS is, how we're measuring that. Yep, I think that's
Through you, the Chair. NPS stands for Net Promoter Score, so it's a commonly used mechanism for looking at, or measure for looking at customer satisfaction. So you generally do a survey and it looks at how many people are satisfied, dissatisfied or ambivalent, and then there's some set methodology around how you do that. So obviously you're looking to try and have the higher the score, the better.
Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. Mr. Berriman-Kemp.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just to one comment and one question. First of all, thank you for these. And I did note that the red SOI was actually the most inclusive and I think the most aligned in terms of our 2030 aspirations, our iwi partnership goals, and I would suggest that was good to see. And also, I guess, my expectation with council-controlled organisations is that they would, whilst I appreciate their boards are responsible for generating the statement of intent, I would have thought the other ones would have been more aligned to the strategic documents and the strategic pathway that the council's going on. So that's a comment to take back. My question is page 98 of the pack, page 18 of the report. Just at the top, the long-term plan revenue streams are obviously to be confirmed. Just asking, is there a time frame on that? Is it normal to not have those out past the next financial year?
No, it's not normal. Normally they include the figures that we have in our long-term plan. What we have done is we've gone back to them and asked them for some efficiency savings, but rather than putting the number in there and accepting therefore that that's what's achievable, they will likely come back to us and say, well, if you expect efficiency savings, these are the consequences, and therefore we wish to weigh those up before obviously locking in that funding going forward.
Thank you, Councillor Gould. Thank you, Councillor Tapsell.
Chair, I had one question on the airport, so can I ask it or do I have to wait? We went over that too quick.
No, perhaps we'll come back to the airport, but just on the Rotorua Economic Development Limited, so we'll come back to that one. Thank you. Councillor Tapsell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just in regards to the business development of this on page 89, and speak about market insights. Now, are those market insights only going to be provided to people that are in partnership with them, or are they available to all businesses? I've got a few questions.
My understanding is they're available to all businesses that they would seek to work with REIT.
Cool. And also on page 91 for the tourism growth, and it's partly with business development as well, but we are actually, how do you put it? We don't have enough supply for the demand that we're getting for accommodation here at Rotorua, but I can't actually see that clearly in here. Is investment in accommodation going to be a priority going forward for this next 3 years?
Simple answer is yes. So it's picked up under the investment attraction space as well. So continue to be looking for investment in the tourism sector as one of the areas which is a priority. Yeah.
Yeah. And then back on the partnership issue, on page 94 in the trade marketing key performance measure, and we talk about 40% external contribution to key campaign activity in priority markets, is that only... Is the campaigns that they go out with only going to be with the partners, or will they be also supporting all of the tourism businesses here in Rotorua?
So in that trade space, which is generally all the international trips, they do work with the broader industry on that. So certainly the likes of Tamaki and so forth, which are not partners, they do work with those on the trade trip. So yeah, the broader industry.
Okay, that'll be good because it's not really being reflected in their current way that they're doing business. And I did have one last question. Oh, also, perhaps for us as well, but just to ensure that the staff at the lower levels in this organisation are given a clear direction, perhaps with our spatial plan and our long-term planning coming up, we could be able to give them a clear direction then, because at the moment I know they're very much just waiting to see what they should do.
I'm sure the CE's picked up on that. Thank you very much. Your Worship?
Yes, I just want to comment that I'm pleased to see Destination Management Action Plan reflected in the KPIs, and that's picking up from Terry Stevens' visit where he said it's not just marketing, it's managing the destination, and I think it's an achievable target, 3. I think that's incremental change that you bring in each year, so I'm really pleased to see that, and it means we're picking up on the external views of how we can lift our game locally, so it's good to see in there. And I'm aware that staff are waiting to get cracking on things, and once the statement of intent is signed off, it's a process that doesn't seem to be understood, I have to say.
Councillor Gould, this is for the...
Thank you, Madam Chair. To do with this CCO, on page 98, your net operating income should be plus $500, as your total expenditure is $6,550,500, and your expenditure is $6,550,000. So it should be at plus 500. Sorry, guys.
You are once again correct, Councillor Gould. There's been some interesting rounding going on there.
Thank you. Ms Morrison?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm on page, I think it's 96 and 16 of the report, and just 2 points really. One's a little bit more sort of theoretical or academic. It's around real GDP growth, and I know that there's, in the sort of marketplace, there's a view that that it doesn't actually capture, the prosperity of a business or a community or a society. And maybe the challenge is how could the CCO, given the council has actually been quite innovative in how it's looking at its objectives, and it's actually moving to a more holistic way of managing infrastructure and supporting our community. How could that potentially in the next SOI be reflected? The more specific question was around the unemployment rate. So I look across at the measures and they're all trying to trend upwards. So we're wanting more visitor nights, we're wanting greater value. And it just seems to me that tracking the unemployment rate is quite a negative. It's pointing, we're trying to push it down the other way. So perhaps a better way to do it that's in line with that, which we're actually trying to shoot for the stars, is that we spin it and we're actually tracking the employment rate and trying to grow the employment rate. So it's just a comment to take back.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Councillor Donaldson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a bit of a query, something I highlighted and I really wasn't going to raise, but I have because of Councillor Tutchell's question about lack of accommodation. The sense I got from the recent Crankworks Festival is there wasn't really a shortage of accommodation if you went to the likes of Bookabatch and those online accommodation options. And I look at the measures, the monitoring indicators on page 96, and I just wonder, does the private homes accommodation monitor capture the use of Bookabatch in holiday homes and Airbnb and so on? Because I get the sense from others in the industry that the commercial accommodation monitor has become a bit skewed by the rise of those accommodation options in our community.
My understanding with that private homes accommodation monitor is it's an APR survey that it does pick up a lot of the visiting friends and family type activity that goes on, but may not necessarily cover Bookabatch and Airbnb as entirely as we might like. So it is one of the areas where we're sort of having a bit of a rethink, but that's going to take a little while to work through in terms of what is a more accurate, how do you provide a more accurate view of that space on an ongoing basis, and it didn't want to obviously include something which we can't measure at this point, so yeah.
Yes, I think at a recent workshop we heard that they're not captured well at this point in time. It's just quite difficult to do, but thank you. There was a question, Councillor Gould, you had in relation to the Rotorua Regional Airport. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your indulgence. Page 72. You've got capital expenditure for 2018 of $4,925,000. Does that come out of the airport's account as a debit, or has that been charged to the council and we have to allow for that in the annual plan process?
As you are aware, when we did the restructuring of the airport, we provide them annual funding, and the capital expenditure and those sorts of things are all covered in the ongoing annual funding that council is providing. So, in other words, it does not have an impact on our long-term financials because it already is included in our long-term financials.
So that could be split over the following year, because the following year you've only got 345,000. I'm just trying to think of the council's funding position, that's all.
Well, I guess it could be, but it might mean that they have a half-finished terminal for a period of time while they spread the remainder of the cost into the next financial year, so it might not be appropriate. So I understand it is what it is because they're trying to complete the upgrade of the terminal, earthquake strengthening and the fire station as quick as possible.
And they could take out a bank loan for part of that cost, which means it's spread.
So Councillor, they do have a banking facility, as you will be aware. They have about a $2.5 to $3 million committed cash advance facility that we've got a forecast with regards to where that is going. That's part of the $18 million worth of debt that was transferred across to the airport. The pleasing thing is at the moment that the balance of that is zero, so they've done extremely well in paying that down, and so therefore they're quite capable of accommodating the capital expenditure within their current banking and borrowing facilities, and has no adverse impact on either their financials or our financials.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you, councillors, for your comments on the statements of intent for our CCOs and for the discussions this morning, and they'll be forwarded to the various organisations. Thank you very much for that. Now, a resolution to exclude the public. We do have one confidential report to be discussed regarding the Polynesian Spa admission charge increase. I just would like to explain why we are going into public excluded. To protect information, we are making this available would likely prejudice the commercial position of the person who supplied or is the subject of the information. I'll call for a mover and a seconder that the committee move into public excluded. It's been moved by Councillor Maxwell, seconded by Councillor Hunt. I would also like to include that the Polynesian Spas, thank you, SPA's Chief Executive, Mr. Gert Talyard, be permitted to remain at this meeting after the public have been excluded. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you, carried. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Berenkamp.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry, just one thing I'd like to note. I have a conflict of interest which I've passed on to staff, so I'll exclude myself from this discussion.